Welcome to the 1 NFP Financials and Financials Lite training on releasing funds from restriction. When you receive money that is restricted, for example, you need to ensure that it's used for a specific purpose or within a specific time period, you'll use the fund and the fund class on the fund to track that restriction. However, when you spend money out of that fund, you'll need to release the money from restriction. In terms used in 1 NFP Financials and Financials Lite, the expense transaction should have an unrestricted fund class assigned. You can create a journal entry to release monies from their restriction, but we also have an automated feature to accomplish this task. So the first step is to define an account that's going to be used for these release from restriction transactions. In my sample company, I created a single account. You may decide to use two, that's up to you, but I've just used one, so it's going to wash through this account when I release funds. The second step is to define the setting on General Ledger Setup. If we scroll down here, this feature is called Reclassification. Check the box to turn the feature on, and in the debit and credit accounts, select the account you defined. As I mentioned, you may use two accounts for the two sides of the reclassification transaction, or just one, as I do in my sample company. This is basically a pass-through account used specifically for the transactions releasing the entry from restriction. Finally, let's return to the chart of accounts for the final setup step. In general, you're only going to want the automatic release from restriction to happen when you post to expense accounts. So on those accounts, you want to define the override fund class. So let's change my filter and look at my expense accounts. The override fund class is here. So what this is telling the software is whenever I post to this account, the transaction should use this fund class unrestricted, regardless of the fund's original fund class. Now, with all the setup in place, I've got my restriction account, I've done General Ledger Setup and defined to use that restriction account, and I've defined which accounts I want to automatically release from restriction. Now let's look at some transactions. Let's open up a deposit. And I have an entry here against a brand new fund that I created. And let's preview the distributions. Now this is a revenue account. So this does not have the release from restriction. So I'm crossing funds because I'm depositing into a bank, but it's not releasing from restriction, which is exactly what we'd expect. Again, if this is a revenue account, so it doesn't release from restriction. So let's go ahead and post that. Next, let's take a look at an expense. So I have an expense entered. It's for this same fund. I'm purchasing some office supplies. I have my vendor and I'm indicating it was paid with a debit card. Now let's look at the preview distributions here. Once again, I cross funds, so I have a due to, due from, but this time I also have these reclassification entries. So if we look at the initial entry that's posting against this expense, the fund class is unrestricted. So I can still track to this fund, but now this transaction will be unrestricted monies. So let's go ahead and post this. The final step, I'd like to take a look. So let's produce the statement of activities and filter just on our one specific fund. Here we can see the award coming in, the money coming in under temporarily unrestricted. We can see the monies released from restriction, and we can see under general office supplies the monies spent as unrestricted. So that's the reclassification or release from restriction function. Again, this is an optional function. You do not have to use this, but it's a very useful feature if you're interested. Thank you very much and keep your eye out for more training.